Hello YouTube, welcome to a brand new Elder Scrolls lore video. This video was supposed to launch on Valentine's Day, but just like every Imperial knowledge video, this video arrived exactly when it meant to. Today we'll talk about the marriage traditions for each of the races of Tamriel. Do keep in mind that contrary to the recent burial and death traditions video, not all the main races are really as fleshed out in terms of lore. Now, before we begin, a huge thanks to my friend Mr. Nerddragon who helped out with the research of this video. I could not have done it without his help, and thus if you ever see him in the comments over here, don't forget to say thank you and hello. With that in mind, let's talk marriage traditions. So, love. It's an essential part of life, and this also holds true for the humans, elves and beast races of the Elder Scrolls games. There are many deities associated with love and affections in its many forms, such as the Aedra, Dibella and even the Daedric Prince Azura. But the deity most associated with love would most definitely be Mara, a goddess that's almost universal, appearing in pretty much every pantheon in Tamriel with very few exceptions. However, at this point some of you will be asking, isn't Dibella the divine of love? Well, yeah, but Dibella and Mara represent different aspects of love. Dibella is about beauty, sex and art, the more carefree love if you will, while Mara on the other hand represents family, stability and fertility. The more responsible kind of love, as many people see it, let's just say. It's not a coincidence then that Mara's design, sphere and even name were heavily inspired by the Virgin Mary from Christianity. I mean, just look at this statue. Marriages under the rites of Mara are by far the most common and widespread across Tamriel, appearing in Altmer, Bosmer, Breton, Imperial and Khajiiti cultures, and it was even present in extinct cultures like the Aelid culture and Snow Elven culture. Just like in the real world medieval times on Tamriel, usually commoners marry for love, but higher members of society such as nobles and kings often partake in political marriages to gain advantages and alliances, such as Potema Septim being married off to the elderly king Mentiarco of Solitude when she was just 14. Which kinda messed up, to be honest, but I mean, history in the real world is full of fucked up marriages as well. I mean, just check the Egyptian Ptolemy family tree. But yeah, reasons for marriage might differ between cultures. Now, on Tamriel, polygamy is uncommon, but not unheard of in some cultures, and the marriage ceremonies themselves are usually quite simple, with either a priest of Mara officiating the wedding, as seen in the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, or two individuals by their own pledging themselves to each other in the front of a shrine of Mara, as seen in the Elder Scrolls Online. The exchange of special rings made to represent the couple's undying bond is a thing in both instances of the ritual, although the name of that ring differs, but they actually did make a replica of the Ring of Mara, of which I got pictures at the courtesy of the viewer the Violet Bunny. So yeah, although to get back to that very short ceremony that we see in the games, that's most likely not all there is to it. There's a considerable possibility that this simplicity is more a gameplay thing than a lore thing. After all, most players wouldn't have the patience to get through in-game hours or even days of rites and celebrations, so the developers would have to simplify things for gameplay. This is strengthened by the fact that we have several instances of marriages appearing in lore books, and it's at least suggested there that it takes a bit longer than a few minutes. One more notable thing about Mara's rites is, by the way, that according to their divine teachings, she loves all her children, no matter form, gender or race, and her children may love themselves the same way. Since in Mara's teachings, when two mortals marry, it's their souls which are unified, which do not have gender or race under Mara's teachings. So it's not their bodies that are joined, but their souls, and as such, both interracial and same-sex marriages are allowed under Mara. Although, unsurprisingly, there have been some cases of discrimination by people who do not follow her teachings. But yeah, now we'll talk about each specific race's traditions regarding love and marriage. And at first we'll cheat a bit, as we'll talk about most of the human races, as the Imperial culture has influenced a number of other human cultures around Tamriel, since the Empire has basically occupied most of the continent, at least the human provinces, for a large part of its history. The Imperial or human version of the marriage rites are the ones that we're most familiar with, since we can see it in the game, especially in Skyrim and the Elder Scrolls Online. The crux of the Imperial love tradition would simply be to wear an amulet of Mara and propose to a loved one. Then a short ceremony would be held, unifying the couple together. Again, the shortness of it may be more of a gameplay problem than a lore problem, but yeah. These traditions are present at large in Cyrodiil, High Rock and modern-day Skyrim. Bretons and Cyrodiilics likely have pretty much the same wedding traditions, although the Bretons may still have some kind of degree of elvish influence, but that's just a guess and not something we know for certain, as we do not have any examples of Breton weddings as far as I'm aware. Now, the Imperials, however, do have a specific tradition regarding the Nibbenese people, which is one of the two sections of Imperial culture. You have Nibbenese and you have Colovian. Because in Nibbenese weddings, it's a tradition to give a special wedding pillow embroidered with the family tree of both spouses to give to the wedded couple on the wedding day. That's basically all that we know, so it's worth a mention. Now, the Nords of Skyrim are a curious case, since by the time of the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim the marriage rites are heavily imperialized, but the Nords still do put their own touch on it. As Marmal, the priest of Mara in Riften, puts it, life in Skyrim is short and rough, and Nords have no time for long courtship. Simply wearing the amulet of Mara in public would signal one's availability, and this implies that longer periods of wooing and courtship may be present among Imperials and Bretons, as you know, the quickness of the ceremony may be just a Skyrim thing. However, we do know that a truly traditional Nordic wedding ceremony itself, as implied by Funwolf Snowshot during the Bound Till Death quest in the Dark Brotherhood questline, would be held in the open air and not in a temple, so in the open air at the mountains under the skies and winds of Kine. Shame we don't have the choice to put up such a traditional Nordic marriage, but you know, gameplay limitations, I guess. There's also an ancient term called warwife among the Nords, but that didn't hold any significance to marriages, it seems, being more used to describe a woman warrior like a shield sister. However, an interesting theory for this is that the word may describe a Nord woman who is married to war itself, so essentially a war maiden. But yeah, that's just a theory. Now, for the Redguards, we don't have a lot of detail about Redguard practices regarding marriage. The only thing we know for certain is that it's quite rare to see unions between Crowns and Forebears, which are the two political factions of Hammerfell, since they hold such different values. Now, other than that, there's just the possibility that the Crowns specifically have their marriages patroned by Morwa, the Yokudan version of Mara, since the Crown are way more traditionalist, while the Forebears are more liberal and tend to worship the Imperial Divine Pantheon, so they may marry under Mara. Next up, let's talk about the Argonians. The Argonians have very different marriage traditions to the rest of Tamriel, and even different tribes of Argonians may have different customs. Many believe that the Hist are involved in some matters, deciding and making sure that mates meet and fall in love, even establishing the time of their future marriage for when the couple is prepared for it. In other words, the Hist manipulate even this aspect of the Argonians along with their biology. Now, regardless of Hist involvement, Argonian tradition dictates that an Argonian presents the person they wish to marry with a special ring with 3 flawless amethysts in it. The 2 on the sides represent the couple and the middle one represents the Hist. This tradition is likely to come from the Blythroats tribe or the Mire Dancer tribe, since they are renowned for their crafts. As for the marriage traditions themselves, well, it's debatable if Argonian weddings can even be considered weddings sometimes. The Argonians, especially the ones from Murkmire, have bonding rituals instead. You see, with some tribes, the tribe simply chooses who will lay the next clutch of eggs and produce the next generation of Argonians, and then pairings are made among this group of people, most from the same tribe, but bonding rituals are often made between different tribes to establish alliances, not unlike political marriages. Such pairings are made according to a variety of reasons: emotional connection, physical attractiveness, advantages to the tribe, among other selection criteria. Another important thing to note is that the pair has mutual respect and appreciation for each other in this ritual, but they don't necessarily have romantic feelings between them. As this ritual isn't really based on romance, because in the ceremony which is made, which we don't have any details on, as the details may even vary between tribes, is a ceremony in which a tree minder blesses the couple with good health and fertility, and then, well, they mate, the couple retreat to their nuptial huts and then... honeymoon time, baby! I mean, okay, jokes aside, this is one of the key elements of the Argonian bonding ritual. The couple has to mate and they have to generate new life. That's the crux of the whole deal, and that's why it's unlike a marriage in other places, because the couple doesn't have to remain together after the deal. Often they just go back to their life as singles after the bonding. The objective here is to increase the tribe's number and not to unite two people for life. A little bit of trivia here is that a letter in Skyrim found in the Temple of Mara from Talon J, one of the innkeepers of the PM Barb, asking the priest of Mara whether he can have a traditional Argonian marriage at the temple with Kivara, the other innkeeper. He even offers to bring books and writings and teach the priest the complicated Argonian language and the phrases needed for the ceremony. Well, if the priest of Mara accepts that, I mean, good luck trying to pronounce all the Gel stuff. I mean, you can try if you understand Gel, which is the language of the Argonians. And I made a video on that a while back, so you can find it in the description if you want to know more about the language of the Argonians. Gel. As that's the language that the ceremonial aspects of the bonding ritual are all pronounced in. Next up are the Khajiit. Now, we know very, very little about Khajiiti love traditions, and that's really a shame, as the Khajiit have a unique and intriguing culture and worldview, as we many times covered on the channel, but we know very little, and we must guess a lot. Now, first and foremost, we know that polyamory seems to be rather common among Khajiit compared to the other races, although it's unknown if this continues after marriage ceremonies in the form of all-out polygamy. Also, we know that the names of Khajiit, or at least their honorifics, change upon marriage, since there are specific honorifics for single lads and ladies, like the J in Jezargo, for instance. If he was to marry, he would no longer use the honorific J. Maybe that's why you can't actually marry Jezargo in Skyrim, as they would have to change his name to just Zargo, or Dar Zargo, or Do Zargo, which are honorifics for clever and warrior Khajiit, respectively. Now, other than that, we know that Mara is their goddess of love, but it's also likely that Azura or Narini, their gods, may have some role in their marriage traditions, giving the importance of them to Khajiiti culture, and maybe the moons even have a role in their marriages, as the moons are even more important in their culture, but it's all just a guess, as we literally know nothing about Khajiiti marriages other than that they exist, as we do have some examples of, for example, political marriages, and we have some example of Khajiit calling other Khajiit husbands or wives. Well, next up are the Bosmer. To be perfectly honest, we have little to no info on the Bosmer traditions regarding marriage. However, we can witness one marriage in the Elder Scrolls Online between the Sylvanar and the Green Lady, who, to put it very oversimplified, are very important figureheads of Bosmer culture and religion, who are destined to be wed and be together, and we can view their wedding in the Elder Scrolls Online. Now, their wedding does reveal that, at least for such a traditional marriage, Bosmer marry before their god Ifre, although less traditional Bosmer seem to still marry before Mara, as we have examples of that as well, which are likely Bosmer influenced by the Imperial pantheon. We also know that upon their marriage they hold a large feast to celebrate the union, but, well, they're wood elves, followers of the Green Pact, meaning that they cannot eat anything plant-based gathered from Valenwood, so if you ever attend a Bosmer wedding, don't expect any vegan options. Alright, next up, the Altmer. Now, as we established in the death and funeral traditions video, link to that in the description if you haven't seen it, Altmer are rather obsessed with matters of bloodline and lineage. As such, their marital customs also take on this aspect, often being arranged between families for the purpose of heritage and purity, not out of love. Now, in fact, many couples betrothed in such a way are loveless, seeing their bond as little more than convenience, and the purity aspect is very important too, often seen as the most important part of a relationship, and as such, interracial marriages or even just romantic relationships with other races, or, just sexual relations with other races involving Altmer are very rare in traditional Altmer circles, although there are a lot of more liberal Altmer. Matchmaking and courtship and the negotiations between the betrothed's family may take years or even decades, because, well, elves live very long, so their, negotiations also take very long. And once the deal of a marriage is arranged between two families, the Altmer then seek the stars and divines for auspicious omen, basing upon them to decide if the couple is compatible and even establish the date of the ceremony itself. I personally would do this before the, decades of negotiation, see if the couple is even compatible, but you know, tradition, I guess. But as such, it's no surprise that on the instance of one or both of the betrothed going back on their word and break the betrothal after it's all fixed, the involved would be seen as outcasts and pariahs. I mean, look at all the work they have to go through to get someone married. I mean, no wonder they get very angry when all the work and effort is just thrown out of the window. But I have to be very clear that these are very traditional Altmer circles, as we do have a lot of examples of Altmer marrying other races, so there's a lot more, you know, liberal ones out there. Now, next up are the Orsimer. You know, orc marriage traditions are among the most unique out there, and that's saying something. Let's start with the Stronghold orcs, since they're what we know most about. As per the Code of Malakat, the chief of the stronghold is the only male allowed to marry and father children. The only way another male, even the chief's sons, can marry is becoming a chief themselves, usually by killing the current chief or, you know, go and found their own stronghold. The orcs value might and strength above all. Only the strongest may have children, so each generation is stronger than the last one. But here's the thing, not only is the chief the only one that can marry, but polygamy is also a big deal, since the chief can marry a pretty much unlimited number of women, forming a harem, with each spouse then deemed a hearth wife, forge wife, hunt wife, shield wife, or any other type of wife with specific duties in the stronghold according to their status. However, there are instances of unofficial or informal unions between either orcs or strongholds and even procreation among them, but you know, officially only the chief can marry. Now, the code doesn't recognize such unofficial unions, but there doesn't seem to exist a harsh penalty for it either. Female orcs from a stronghold will often be betrothed to other chiefs as well, which is basically a political marriage. But here's something interesting that you may not know, because, you know, what about female orcs? Well, it's possible, apparently, under the Code of Malakat, for a female orc to form her own stronghold and in turn marry as many males as they wish in basically a reverse harem situation. These males, in this instance, take the traditional roles of wives with the same title, so you have hearth husband, shield husband, etc. We don't see this in the game, but it is there in the lore, which is interesting. Now, outside of strongholds, there's a very interesting and also kind of hilarious orc engagement or wooing ritual. You see, before wooing a woman, the suitor must fight a great battle, because he must smell of battle and the blood of his enemies. And then he presents the desired maiden with eschateri cheese and spiced ale, which is rumored to be a sort of aphrodisiac. I mean, see my video on the cheeses of Tamriel for more information on that. And lastly, the suitor then recites a love poem with war, violence, blood or revenge as a background, but at the same time trying to flatter and compliment the maiden in question. She may accept or not accept, and I mean, not gonna lie, I would find it absolutely hilarious to watch an orc wooing ritual. I mean, I can only imagine what kind of poems that they come up with, which are both romantic for the maiden, but at the same time are drenched in violence. I mean, sure. As for Twinimek worshipping orcs, so orcs that do not worship Malakat but rather Twinimek, we don't know much about their traditions. It's said that among them, that if two orcs truly love each other and are married at heart, it's just as valid as any other marriage. Meaning that they don't really use ceremonies at all, as, you know, they can just decide themselves, well, we are married, and if they are truly married at heart, it's recognized before Twinimek. Now, finally, we've got the Dunmer, so the Dark Elves. The thing about the Dunmer is that we know how their marriages worked before the 4th era, but we don't really know how they work nowadays, since the Tribunal isn't necessarily, you know, around anymore after you kill Amalexia, Sotasil is killed, and Vivek disappeared. Regardless, during the Tribunal's rule over Morrowind, marriages would happen at a shrine of Almalexia. Sometimes she was called Mother Morrowind. Due to her title and nature as mother, Almalexia would then be regarded as presiding over family, fertility and love. In other words, a kind of Dunmer version of Mara for the ritual. At least that's how it worked for the House Dunmer. The betrothed from the lesser house would then be accepted into the house of the spouse-to-be, which is the higher house, following oaths and loyalty to both their spouse and their clan. This would make them able to interact with the ancestors of the spouse's clan, though their connection would be a bit weaker than someone who would have the actual bloodline. Additionally, they can still retain access to their own ancestors if they wish to visit their tombs, even though they no longer carry their names. Now, political marriages also were relatively common, especially during the Empire's rule, but the Dunmer still have attractiveness and intimate bonds as being important for a marriage. There aren't many, if at all, references to Ashlander marriage traditions, but it's known that sometimes, very rarely, weddings between House Dunmer and Ashlanders would happen, despite their clear belief differences. But again, this would be extremely rare. As for the Ashlanders themselves, we don't know an awful lot. But we do know, however, that wives and brides are rather objectified and are often offered between tribes as signals of alliance and peace. Now, in the 4th era, after the fall of the Tribunal, we don't really know how their culture works in that regard, but it would be a fair assumption to say that Azura would likely be their main deity for such matters, since she has connections to love, and I can't see Mephala and Boethia having ties to marriage. But that's pretty much it for the marriage and love traditions of Tamriel. It was quite a ride. Now, tell me, which one of these rites is your favorite, and which tradition would you like to marry under, if any? Make sure to tell me and Mr. Nerddragon, the guy who helped out with this video, in the comments. And with that said, that's everything I can say on the marriage traditions around Tamriel, and I really hope that you learned something. And if you did, consider returning for the next Elder Scrolls lore video. That being said, all that rests me now is to vocally thank my top Patreon supporters, Mr. Bernardo Binda, Gabriel Binda, Polarized Putin, Athena Hyotis, King Chris, Bulge, Craft of the Scrolls, Doji, Fenrir, Sword of Bushido, Rakai, and Mr. Christmas. It's thanks to all these people and all the others on screen that this channel stays alive, and for that I'm very grateful. That said, I hope to see you all in the next Elder Scrolls lore video, and I hope that next time my throat isn't so sore. This was torture to record. Goodbye.